Hello and welcome to Pink Building, the show that family violence and child aware practice episode 1. I'm Lenny Cunisala and today you will be hearing from experienced family violence practitioners and the other leaders in the field to discuss the topic of family violence and child aware practice. We will highlight a number of things during this podcast. I will be looking at the climate of fear that children live within and context of family and domestic violence, the impact of family and domestic violence on children, including its impact on the mother-child relationship. This podcast is the first episode of we will be presenting around this topic because there's a lot to discuss and we're only just getting started. We're hearing first from Lucille Mikulog.
I think when we're wanting to understand domestic and family violence, and we have those core concepts of coercive control, intimidation, fear, power, one has to remember that children are also experiencing that. And so often what comes to mind for me is imagine yourself living in a climate of fear and what that does to yourself. And so think about children living in a climate of fear, and so the lens then gave us another way of looking at how domestic and family violence impact on children. So how does it impact their development? How does it impact on their social well-being? How does it impact on their mental health? And so when you start to see children's behavior, often we can jump to individual explanation. So I think by acknowledging the climate of fear enables you to see the world through a child's eyes.
Alright, that was Lucille Mikulog emphasizing the climate of fear that children experiencing family or domestic violence are living in. It seems an important place to start in understanding children's experience and in working with their parents. We also spoke with experience from Barangay Saray about some of their understandings of the impact of family and domestic violence on children's mental health and well-being. Let us hear the voice Grace Yorong and Rio Mi Tolentino.
Parents tells us so many things about how their children are being affected. So I've heard stories about how children will be afraid to leave their mother, afraid to go to school, afraid to sleep alone at night, will have nightmares, will develop feelings of anxiety and sadness. Their behavior will be different than it normally is. They might stop eating, start wetting the bed. They might cry often and be irritable. They may appear clingy. There's a whole range of things that parents told us about their children and what they have observed that can be related to family violence or sometimes not. They just notice some changes of their children.
The impact it has on the children is very disruptive. It has them feeling unsafe and not secure. And sometimes, acting out at school, the anxiety levels can increase. And they are just the things that I notice when I'm inquiring into the impact of the violence on children. What they describe by the parents. Usually, the mother is noticing these things. And that's a dilemma for her because she's worried about that and nothing to protect these children from violence, which is often really difficult when men are exercising a lot of parent control.
Okay, that is Grace and me comments. Have me thinking about the importance of practitioners having an understanding of the impacts of family violence on children and then drawing on this understanding when working with parents and children to be curious about the particular effects of the violence in each family they're meeting with. Next, let's hear the voice Emeline Macad.
For most people with children, they must feel that they're doing the best. That's a very hard thing because when you're a parent, there are always the scenes that you're getting it wrong and you're not doing well enough. But when there's violence and there's abuse around, I think that gets amplified. It gets amplified for me in a way that shame can often come into the picture and can have them minimizing their behavior and can have them denying aspects of their behavior that are having effects on their children.
And it have mothers feeling very ashamed that there's the one responsible for the effects on their children. They're the one responsible for their partners or ex-partner's behavior because they're not being a good enough mother or a good partner. Yeah, and that's when the whole idea of mother's blame comes and is well supported. When people will say to women, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just pick up the kids and go? Why don't you stand up to him? Or when you call the police, or why don't you do all sort of things that women do or don't do because they know from past experience what's safe and what's not safe to do. And the best way they possibly can to keep themselves and their children safe.
Hearing from a mother that she's blaming herself for the effects of violence on her children, what may be important is to be contextualizing those reasons to make visible what she's been up against and therefore ensuring the responsibility for the effects of the violence on her and her children is attributed to the parent perpetrating it. Let's hear Shelami Arevalo for the beliefs this is vital.
So, I think it's very important in our conversation, if we want to have real conversation and get to one is the impact on children. We have to share responsibility. We have to decrease the responsibility that she's taking for that, and we need to talk about, well, what's been the impact of violence? What have those children seen that you feel worried about? To talk to her that this is damaging, but it's not irreversible. That your relationship with those children is really important. You've got a lot to offer them.
So what else can support practitioners to have conversations with mothers about the effects of violence on their children without making them feel responsible for the violence? They need some time to have their story heard so that we can start making sure that their children are safe. But if someone's really traumatized and we know that children are potentially being traumatized as well, we've got to take care about the children. But we've got to take care about the moms as well, because otherwise they're in no position to be able to even act on their children's behalf, let alone their own behalf. The efforts began small, noticed and unnoticed, that she has made to minimize the impact of the violence on herself and her children.
So, I think women are usually pretty proud and happy to step into talking about their preferences as parents and often hearing those stories, right? We then hear about the things they are not happy with and the things that are robbing them of the kind parenting practices they want to be using. So it might be a less direct way of hearing about their strengths and then also the things that are letting them down around them. And then, in hearing those stories, I guess we can evaluate with them if they are up to it and wanting that what kind of effects they are happy or less happy.
Wouldn't say that I use a strength-based approach, and that might sound a bit rude for some people who would be listening to this, but I think it's to do with when I think of the strength-based approach. I think about us identifying strength with people, and of course, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I guess from my perspective and the way I work, I'm keen for people not to see themselves as a being particular way. So to give you an example, if I'm talking with a woman and she's been able to get out of a violent relationship and take her children with her, and then she identifies that low courage to do that, then that's good.
Okay everyone, let's end this program. You've listened to the first of the series on the topic of family and domestic violence and child-aware practice with family violence practitioners, service leaders and researchers. In the next episode of this series, we will be considering other aspects of this work, including possible entry points into conversations about children's well-being with mothers experiencing family violence and fathers who are using violence. We'll also be looking at themes of safety, complexity, and organizational support. Thank you for listening, everyone.
This episode of The Pink Building was brought to you by our sponsors, Santa Monica Institute of Technology, GE Elective, and Students. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's show, check it out in our YouTube channel, Facebook page, and Instagram to gain access to our free resources. Thank you.